Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about what I like to call paralysis by analysis and exercise selection. And what I mean by this is when people overanalyze stuff to the point to where it becomes either counterproductive completely or it becomes wasteful. And what people need to realize, there isn't anything unscientific or illogical about using basic conventional exercises. All right, these exercises work. Conventional basic exercises work. They are time proven. They have been used by strength conditioning coaches and top athletes around the world, oftentimes for decades. And when you deviate away from these exercises, it needs to be for an actual legitimately good reason. In other words, if you move away from these and add additional exercises or replace these exercises with something, it's probably in your best interest to make sure that that exercise is going to do something more for you than the basic is towards your goals. In other words, if it does less for you, it was probably not a good idea. And I am all for science. I am all for research. I am all for analyzing this stuff. But the problem we have is that you get a lot of people, they get hung up in pseudoscientific concepts. And oftentimes these are people who refer to themselves as evidence-based. We see a lot of this in the online fitness community, guys who start talking about evidence-based bodybuilding. But then they do things that aren't evidence-based. They do things that are unproven hypothesis. And a perfect example of this is something that I called out multiple people on years ago, many years ago here on YouTube. You guys remember Ian McCarthy and Sebastian Sunit? And then later this involved that guy, Memo Helmsley or whatever his name is, because he associated with both of those guys. The perfect example. They were talking about you have to line up the angle of pull or press on your exercises with the direction of the muscle fibers if you want the best recruitment of muscle fibers in the muscle. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that line of thinking. There can even be a degree of truth there as far as making efficient use of your leverages. But that doesn't ensure more muscle fiber recruitment, and here's the kicker. It doesn't guarantee better or even equal development in some cases. And that the reason is you can't always set up an exercise ideally to do that in a way that's actually going to give you a way to effectively get development. And I remember Sebastian and Ian both going on and on talking about, well, a lot of people struggle to build their backs. Really? I've never met anyone who trains with me who struggles to build their back. And again, people say, well, that's in one comparison. No, it isn't, guys. People have built massive, tremendous backs who simply do a lot of heavy pulling. And I don't care what sort of pulling it is. Pull-ups, rows, deadlifts. All right, people build massive backs using any of those exercises in any combination as long as they get strong enough and move enough workload. Period. Flat out happens. And I'm talking even natties. All right, we've all seen it for decades. The back is one of the least complicated sets of muscles to build up. It's just one of those muscles that you have to do hard work. Pulling heavy weight is hard. It's difficult. And ultimately, what a lot of these guys do, they just don't want to do any work. And so they try to come up with a lazy approach that they think is going to work better than doing these big, basic, heavy exercises, which is a proven method of building your back. Now, they'll stand there and say, well, what we came up with was, you use a cable crossover machine and you do pull downs, like lat pull downs at an angle using the handles. Now, in what world does anyone live in to where you're going to get any significant amount of resistance doing that? Unless you anchor yourself to the floor. And then think about the side loading involved, your side pulling all sorts of stuff on your lower back. It's ridiculous. And these guys did it, and you know what the end result was? Both of them failed to build their backs. Neither one of these individuals who used this approach, this scientific approach as they termed it, and I'd call it pseudoscience, that's no difference than any of the bro science that all these bros come up with. Because it's not time proven in a lab to where we had people do this exercise for 3 years and them get better back development than a guy who did weighted pull-ups and deadlifts. This is pseudoscience. It's bro science. It's based on a hypothesis. Nothing more. That's what every other single piece of bro science is based on. And they analyze this to the point to detriment. Neither one of them had any back development, and they were both still weak and tiny, and they still didn't build their backs doing it. The same thing, we saw this Memo Helmsley, whatever his name is, guy, and he got an argument with me on my Facebook fan page over it, promoting the same exercise, and he said, well, I failed to build any significant back development doing lots of rows and deadlifts. I got up to where I was doing 120 pounds on the rows and 315 for work sets on the deadlift. And I'm sitting here going, those are noob numbers. My novice lifters outlift that on my novice program. All right, I take people and have them lifting heavier weights than that in less than a year. So you're lifting noob numbers. Of course you had a noob back. What more would you expect? Again, progressive overload. That is, again, a time-proven concept. Progressive overload is what builds muscles bigger and stronger. Your progressive overload was that of someone who's been in the gym for 6 months or less. So why would you expect to have a bigger back than someone who's been working out less than a year? And it was kind of ridiculous that he made that point. And then he's like, and then I switched to these lat pull downs from the cable crossover, and now I have back development. And he didn't have a back. His back was still underdeveloped. And he wondered why. And it's like, the reality is your back was underdeveloped because you do silly shit. You do silly shit trying to build your back, and you're afraid to put in some basic hard work. See, because the difference is they could say, well, that's being bro. No, you guys are using bro science. Progressive overload is a time-proven method of building your back. In fact, if you want to look at various data that's out there, look at EMG data on deadlifts. You want to tell me that deadlifts don't light your lats up? I'm not saying the deadlift is the best exercise ever invented for your lats. It isn't. There are superior exercises. But let that sink in. EMG studies show that the latissimus dorsi is heavily activated on the deadlift, even though it doesn't move it through a full range of motion. Now, I would say there's full range of motion exercises that beat it because they're full range of motion exercises. How about a weighted pull-up? All right, there you go. But these guys are afraid to do these basic heavy exercises, and they will do nonsense like this. Or people want to convolute everything. Instead of doing goofy fluff exercises because they're afraid of hard work, they'll run with a concept. And it's like someone showed me this morning something I've never heard of before in my life. Then I went and Googled it, and it was this thing called seal. Like, what do you think of seal rows? And I'm like, I think that's silly bullshit. Now, I'm not saying there aren't some top lifters who do them. Of course there are. But you know what? Top lifters oftentimes do a lot of silly bullshit. And some of this should be common sense. Purpose of these seal rows is what? To use your hamstrings and posterior chain less, and your spinal erectors while doing a row, so that you can be stricter. So they get on a bench and they complicate this. Well, here's the problem. So I even saw people where they're having to put benches up on stands or all sorts of stuff to make sure they get the full range of motion, because if you do it just on a normal bench, you're doing a partial in the middle. Well, partials in the middle isn't the best way to build a muscle either. Full range of motion with moderately heavy weight is. So if you're just doing it on a normal bench, you can't touch your chest, so you're trimming inches off of the range of motion at the top of the lift, the peak and traction. And if you can't get to the floor, you're also losing the stretch and the reset at the bottom. So what a lot of people are doing is even lifting their back up to try to do it, and they're complicating an exercise. You know what? We've had an exercise for many years that does this exact thing. It's called a pin lay row. And you just try to be strict with your form. Problem solved. You don't need to roll it under a bench. You don't have to roll a bar under a bench and load it up, or try to stack blocks or whatever up to do any of this. You just put a barbell on the floor and put your plates on and do pin lay rows. Problem solved. And you get a longer range of motion. You can do it from a dead stop. Now people say, but you can cheat on it. Well, you can choose to cheat on it. If you're not smart enough to not cheat on a basic exercise that you need to use a bench, I don't know what to tell you. Needless complication that offers no benefit over a pre-existing simpler exercise. It carries no benefit over that. Yet people want to do it. And in fact, you lose range of motion. So you actually have a detriment and a degree of complexity. For what? It's added nothing over a basic exercise we already have. There's no benefit over it other than adding complexity. Not saying it won't work. Of course it'll work. But it's adding complexity for zero additional benefit. Paralysis by analysis. It's just bullshit at a certain point. It's bullshit. And it's just silly when you think about it. Just think this stuff through, guys. Think things through without over-analyzing them and convoluting them and creating unnecessary complexity in your training. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.